Hello and welcome to Gettable, afl.com.au's home of trade, draft, free agency and contract news. I am Riley Beveridge. This is Cal Twomey. Cal, we've got a big episode coming for you today. We'll be looking back and reviewing everything that came out of last week's Telstra AFL draft. We'll also be projecting forward a little bit and looking at everything that is to come in a big 2025.
Can you believe it? A week since the Telstra AFL draft rally. It's been a massive week last week and we can't wait to wrap it up for everyone today. And what a year it's been as well. Our 35th episode this week for the year. And it's been a great season of trade, draft, free agency news. So we'll wrap it all up today and say farewell. But it's also coming on the back of what was a massive draft. There were so many talking points out of it.
Well, it was the draft of the Tiger, as we sung last week. Richmond's haul was remarkable. They ended up using 6 first-round picks. They did a deal to get into next year's draft as well. And it all started with the number 1 overall selection. Who was that man right there? Sam Lawler.
Yeah, Sam Lawler was the call, wasn't it? I just want to talk about the overall picture from the Tigers, because they were the story of the draft, with Lawler, Smiley at 7, Taj Houghton at 12, Jonty Fall pick 14, Luke Traynor 21, Harry Armstrong pick 23, and then the next couple of picks on night 2 and Tom Sims at 28 and Jasper Alba at 58. They went for a high talent scope. So that was pick 1 onwards. They didn't shirk it with any of their picks. They backed in some big projection talents, and they could have gone for some more bankable players in some ways. It's harder to draft tall key position players in the national draft. There's no doubt about that. And they went with those guys, Armstrong, Traynor, Fall. The history of the draft shows that you generally have to pick multiple tools at the top end to nail a couple and to get a couple of these guys to come through and be really high talents. It's the hardest pick and player to find at the draft, but they absolutely went for it with a few of their selections, knowing that this is the start of the build, and this can, if it works, set them up really, really well. So their high talent projection started at number 1 with Sam Lawler, who's got some absolute high-end capability, and if we see him get through a full season and full pre-season, I think we'll see that sooner rather than later. But I also found it interesting how they said after the draft that this wasn't part of the plan, but you'd have to say it come into some part of the thinking that all these guys were friends. They're all Victorians. They'd all played a lot of footy together through either their local clubs. Some of them have grown up through under-12s basketball together and all sorts of different teams in the Sandringham region. So I do think that adjustment will be made quicker by virtue of the fact that they all knew each other well, and that's sort of the way they played it. So, yeah, massive couple of nights for the Richmond Footy Club. There's no question about that. And they played it in the high talents game. And
they also got into next year's draft, as we mentioned, North's Future 1 as part of that live trade.
What did you think of that one?
The last pick. I liked it from both clubs. I mean, it makes sense from Richmond because they could end up ultimately going into 2025 with what looks as 2 top 5, top 6 picks. But I also liked it from North Melbourne's perspective in the sense that they'd been trying to do that all the way through the draft. They were trying to do it from pick 8 onwards. And as I said on draft night, if they had done that trade with the Giants, say, at pick 15 and taken the exact same player in Matt Whitlock, everyone probably praises the trade. The fact that it happened 12 picks later, they got the same player. That's where the criticism comes, that it's a late time in the night to trade your future first pick. But that was the player they wanted, Matt Whitlock. They had a couple of names on their board. I think they would have obviously liked to trade into for Alex Taru had they've got pick 8 from St Kilda. But once he was off the board, once Harry Armstrong was off the board as well, they turned their attentions towards Matt Whitlock. So I didn't mind the deal for them.
Well, just with the Tigers as well, with Trainor's selection, the Tigers were worried that Sydney would take him the next pick. So they had to get him first there. And that's where knowing some draft intel is important, because the Swans weren't looking as much at Harry Armstrong. It was more of a chance to get through Harry Armstrong, which did happen. They took the toll in between there. Take Traynor first, get him off the board, and then get Harry Armstrong through the next selection. So Tasmania is coming, but the Tigers want to beat them there. And so to get this haul of 8 players, plus hold 2 likely top 5 picks next year, gives them a very strong platform. And Lawler's a leader of that group as well, and he will be for not just the coming months, but the coming years.
And it's a good point as well in terms of high projection guys, because another one of them, aside from the key position talents, is obviously Taj Houghton. We don't know how good Taj Houghton can be. They took him at pick 12. He's a high projection guy, given he didn't play much senior footy in 2024. What about St Kilda? Because we knew about their two top 10 picks. They ended up going with Toby Travalia and Alex Taru, but then they had a big night on night 2 as well.
Well, there's so much hysteria when we put out the Phantom draft and had Toby Travalia and Alex Taru at the Saints picks. But they were the right calls, because the Saints brought in 2 tough, hard competitors. Taru could be the best player in it. He won't be next year, I don't think, because given he's coming back from this back injury, he'll take some time, and we might not see as much of him as other players who've come out of that first top 10 to 12 selections. But he was the star of the pack. Toby Travalia was the most bankable player nearly in the whole draft. So I like the capability that he's got to go into the midfield too. People ask, where's the midfielder? Well, it might actually be him. And Taru could well be one of the best key forwards in the group as well. They took James Barrett later on. He was a pretty popular player in that part of the draft as a mean, competitive halfback slash third tall defender. Hugh Boxall's a midfield option as well for them out of the West. Alex Dodson was probably one of the sliders.
Yeah.
This wasn't the year to be a ruck. No one wanted the rucks this year, so he got through a few more selections, but they needed to add to their young ruck stocks. And then they also brought in Patrick Said, who has some pace and some dead-eye capability inside 50. So I thought the Saints had a really good couple of nights, and there are options for them to trade up or trade back, and they tried to get back in to see if they could have a crack at Joe Berry.
Yep.
But in the end, they did the right thing by holding 7 and 8 and sticking with those selections, and they've gone for a really strong draft strategy over the last couple of seasons. And don't deviate from the draft is a pretty good way to start under a coach that's come back into contention over the last couple of seasons.
Essendon, we knew what they were going to do on night one. Their night was pretty quiet. They matched the bid on Isaac Kako as expected. That came at pick 13 with Richmond placing that. But then night 2, they were one of the big players.
They were. I mean, the Kako one we've spoken about. I just don't think there's any doubt that if they'd held where they were, that a bid would have come before that selection. That's just the way the bidding system works. And in the end, you turn into pick 9 into Isaac Kako at pick 13 and a future first round pick. If that's the deal,
yeah.
Do you take that deal?
Yeah.
I probably do. And then you look at next year as well and say you've got 2 firsts and 2 seconds and head into next season with that sort of hand for the first time. I think that's pretty encouraging prospect and spot to be in. As for the rest of their selections, well, they'll back half of the draft picks, won't they? But they did look at some positional needs, and Kale Girine is one of those as a tall forward ruck option. I like the pick of Reece Unwin late. I think there's a few clubs that in the 40s and 50s who didn't have selections around there who would have liked to take Reece Unwin, and as a complementing player to Isaac Kako, I think we'll be able to do that. And Angus Clark's already stamped his first impression on the footy club with his 2-kilometre time trial earlier this week, so he can run and move. So I think those as a mix is a pretty good balance for a footy club that had its top end pick already set in stone going to the night. And
to bank some future picks as well in a year where you could either take those picks to the draft, or as we're about to speak about later, there's some pretty handy names that could be on the trade table at the end of the year. There are a couple of twists across the course of both nights 1 and 2. We want to speak about some of the picks that changed the course of the draft.
Yeah, I think the Crows' number 4 pick, all the way in the lead up to the draft, we spoke about this, which way they were going to go and what effect that would have on the top 10. They went with, obviously, Sid Draper at that selection over Harvey Langford. Let's talk about the alternative universe, which we like to do. Bizarro world of them taking Harvey Langford and what that would have meant for the rest of the group, because it would have spilt over Alex Taru to go to Melbourne at the next selection. I think then the Tigers would have the call between Josh Smiley and also Sid Draper. It probably would have forced through Sid Draper to get to St Kilda.
Okay.
And then that means what would they have done with Travalia? What would their mix have been? Would Lindsay have come into things? Would Joe Berry have come into things there? What would their actual group have been? It probably would have ended up being Draper and Travalia. But then again, that pushes the mix out again 1 or 2 spots. So that selection for the Crows was a big one. I think the Blues call actually ended up being between mostly Jagger Smith and Harvey Langford. They clearly had Jagger Smith ranked at number 1, so they've done a lot of work to get to that point. And I do feel the Tigers pick 12 and then number 14, Taj Houghton and Jonty Fall, changed the direction of the first round. Clubs were coming for both of those guys. Richmond knew that. They obviously had them well and truly in the mix. I think if Xavier Lindsay had got past the Demons, that would have been a really tight call between him and Houghton, which way they would have gone. The Tigers weighed up Beau Allen in that position as well. Joe Berry was in that range. Jonty Fall, they knew Sydney was keen on him, as was, widely sort of linked as well in the lead up, and weren't going to take that risk that the Swans could either push up the board to take him or that he could get through to their selection. So they weren't going to risk that. They took the guy that they ranked clearly as the number 1 key forward in the pool. So there were a couple of picks that changed the course of the early proceedings on night 1.
Taj Houghton was going to be a twist wherever he went, but the Jonty Fall pick as well probably changed the direction of the key forwards in terms of where Harry Armstrong got to. He ended up getting to Richmond later in the piece as well. But Jobe Shanahan, the Whitlock boys, it changed a lot of things for those guys as well. What about the player that everyone wanted across the course of the draft? Everyone was coming for Joe Berry.
There they were, smoking Joe Berry. The Saints offered their future first rounder to get back into the pool after taking obviously Taru and Travalia. So that was to eye Joe Berry. They stopped obviously once he was off the board. Sydney tried to buy back up the order to get in and have a shot at Joe Berry as well. And if Beau Allen hadn't have been there at the West Coast pick, then they would have taken Joe Berry. So Port had what turned out to be a bit of a smokescreen of one of the talls. But they did like Jack Whitlock. I think probably just a couple of selections after where Joe Berry had sort of become their man. Murphy Reid was probably in between that as well as the next option. Port did the deal with West Coast to ensure Fremantle couldn't get up the board. Fremantle was trying to get up the board for Murphy Reid to ensure they could get their guy. So they kind of all got their own players just in a mix of each other. And Port did it just to make sure no one else could get the deal. So I'm fine with that in terms of using the extra pick to do that. Fremantle actually offered more in terms of 14 and 30. But West Coast was more aware of what Port Adelaide was going to do with the pick rather than moving back a spot and then missing out on their guy in Beau Allen. But for me, the player everyone wanted that was everyone's talking about was Joe Berry. Melbourne even had him a couple of spots behind that sort of Xavier Lindsay selection. Clearly he was in the mix for Freo if Murphy Reid had been off the table as well. So yeah, he was hot property, Smoker Joe.
I reckon he would have been Carlton's man at pick 12 had they have stayed there, but they hadn't, of course. A couple of months ago, they did that deal with West Coast for pick 3 and moved up a lot of spots higher. The trade ended up looking all right for both parties.
Yeah, it did. I mean, let's look at the actual details here of what they paid for Jagger Smith.
Yeah.
For getting some late back-end picks that were very minor in the scheme of things.
Help match points as well.
Carlton landed Jagger Smith for pick 12, a future first rounder, a future second rounder, and Matt Owies. So if they rated him the number 1 pick, which they obviously have communicated publicly that they did, then that's what they pay for number 1 pick. So pick 12, a future first rounder, a future second rounder, and Matt Owies. And West Coast, out of the pick slide deal that copped a lot of criticism through the trade period from pick 3 to pick 12, ended up trading pick 3 for Liam Baker, Matt Owies, Beau Allen, and Tom Gross. So they were delighted with the selection that underpaid there and got them Beau Allen on the night. It was interesting, actually. I did hear in the room that when West Coast made the trade back from that selection to one spot back, Beau Allen was a bit like, what's going on? Like, I thought that was me. But in the end, they knew he was going to get through to that selection, and Port Adelaide had their eye on Smoking.
We're a couple of months out from round 1, Cal, but who plays round 1 of these crop, do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fair few who will be adamant they will be able to. Jagger Smith will be one of them, and I think he will. Levi Ashcroft, clearly, if he gets back in time from that shoulder surgery he was aiming for opening round, wasn't he, when we chatted to him last week? Sid Draper, I think, will. Isaac Kako, you can lock in. Toby Travalia, I believe, will be ready to go. Harvey Langford, I haven't spoken about Harvey Langford too much, but I love the Harvey Langford pick. You know how much I've been a fan of Harvey Langford throughout this year. Rated number 3 in the draft crop, and that was for good reason. His season was outstanding, and he's ready to play. I know even his first session at Melbourne last week, I think he was right in amongst the bigger bodies. Beau Allen, I think, will be ready to play as well, and his versatility helps. Murphy Reid, Jesse Detoli. There's a few inside that first round who I think are ready to go.
There certainly are. Well, Cal, on the Google Pixel, the Magic Editor feature lets you edit your photos right on your phone. So today we'll know if you could edit a player higher up the draft board, who would it be? Who would your steal of the draft be?
Oh, I thought Freo did wonderfully well to get Murphy Reid at pick 17. I think this guy has creative instincts that no one else inside that first round has. I think his ball use is really good, and we'll see him prove a few wrong, I reckon, when he gets out there next year and shows what he can do in that Dockers midfield. Pick 17, a great result for the Dockers, and he'll come in and add some immediate class.
I want to ask you some quick ones. Who dropped?
Well, Jack Whitlock and Jobe Shanahan were the two went. Pick 33 and 30, respectively. That just shows, I think, we talk about drafting tools and the difficulty of what Richmond's done and the courage as well to go for some of these tools and try and build your spine. Some clubs just err on the side of caution and go for midfielders and some other types because they know they're more known quantities. Jack Whitlock's probably not going to be playing so much senior footy for a couple of years. Jobe Shanahan might, probably more so, in terms of his body shape and frame. But yeah, clubs have to take time with these players, and Port was rapt to get Whitlock through.
Who was the underrated popular pick of the draft?
Josh Dolan was the guy in the aftermath that everyone had a real love for. He got to the Dogs at pick 31. Port Adelaide, Fremantle, Hawthorn, Essendon all liked him in the 30s. So he was very popular in the 30s.
they see me doling.
Yep.
And who is next year's number 1 pick?
They weren't hating. Who was next year's number 1 pick? Well, I don't want to put it out there just like and say this guy is going.
This guy is going to be. It's
But
an open field.
It is an open field. We did our top 10 to watch on the weekend on AFL.com.au. Willem Dersma has all the traits and talent to be right up there, and he's a different type of player in terms of his athleticism. So keep an eye on him for that spot. Cooper Duff-Tytler is one I'm keeping a bit of a watch just as a bit of a smoky type, as a tall key position play. He's one of the best tools in it, shaping up to be. And Dyson Sharp has genuine runs on the board as one of the big-bodied players in the midfield from South Australia. So there's a couple, but things change.
That's for 2025. It's going to be a big year in 2025. We'll be back on Gettable, of course, but there's going to be some contracts to watch in 2025.
Yes,
we want to talk about the top 10 contract stories of the year.
All right, let's go over to the wall. So let's
You
have
go
a
with
look.
what I'm saying here.
The contract stories for 2025. I want to go through these ones. These are the ones that we're going to be watching
Yep.
and talking about.
Chad
every single
Warner is
week.
obvious.
Every single week. Yeah, the Chad chase is pretty obvious. He's the biggest story heading into next year. I think West Coast has 4 first-round picks to play with, given it's going to have 2 in the future as well. Fremantle has 3. They both met with him this year. They've spoken to him. They've chased him hard all season. What impact, if any, does the coaching change at the Swans hold for him? Clearly, Sydney is hopeful of kickstarting talks early, but I can't see that happening anytime soon. He's going to back himself and give himself a big decision to make, and his value is only going up and up and up. All right, all the way for TDK. Who does it and who goes it? We saw a rush for Tom de Koning two years ago.
2023.
2023, when he was last out of contract.
Yep.
With Geelong and Sydney and St Kilda all in for him. He resisted that, signed on for 2 more through to free agency, but he's worth far more now.
Yep.
You've seen him.
He's almost doubled in price tag, I reckon.
Doubled. Well, he might well get lifetime offers. He
Yeah.
will get lifetime offers from clubs, and I don't think Carlton's going to be in a position to be able to match that in terms of money.
Yeah.
But given their salary cap, given that they've got Sam Walsh coming out the next year as well as a free agent.
You'd have to leave a lot on the table to stay.
Yep. And that's a decision that he's going to have to make. But the way it's going and the way it's tracking, he's going to get some enormous money sent to him.
And of course, he's a free agent, whereas Chad Warner isn't. Chad Warner's still 2 years away from hitting free agency, so that's the deal there. You'd have to trade for Chad, but you could just get TDK for nothing.
This is another big storyline that's going to be all over the place in 2025. The big D3, so Christian Petrarca, Clayton Oliver and Keziah Pickett. All eyes are on these 3 this season heading into 2025 for obvious reasons. Petrarca will be 30 by the time the 2026 season starts. So if he wants to leave again in 2025, then he'll have more time to set it up and clubs will have more picks to play with to get it done. But there's obviously a lot of focus on the rest of the guys as well.
If you were to pick one, who would you say is most likely to leave?
I've got a closest watch on Keziah Pickett.
Yeah,
He's
okay.
got 2 years to go on his contract. Every off-season flirts with a move. This year, even the last 24 hours of the trade period, still interested in moving to Fremantle once Shea Bolton landed there as well. Other times it's been West Coast or Port Adelaide. So those clubs will all come hard for him. He's gone to contract though, obviously.
Yeah,
So
until 27.
So they have the right to sort of make the play or not let it move. But I do think that one is the watch that I'm looking at out of all 3.
Can I give you an underrated one there as well
Yep.
at Melbourne? If West Coast and Freo are going to be chasing Chad Warner, I think they'll be chasing Judd McVeigh as well. Player out of contract in 2025. I'm not saying he's going to leave. I mean, he signed early last year to stay and commit his future at Melbourne, but he's turning into a seriously good footballer. What about Matt Rowell? You mentioned him last week. You put his name on the radar.
Yeah, we put this on the agenda about a month ago and it's not changed. Victorian clubs are watching this one closely. The Suns would love to have Matt Rowell signed up for another couple of seasons already through to free agency, but hasn't moved at that pace yet. Said a few weeks ago I expect Collingwood to have a crack at Matt Rowell. Well, Collingwood is in for Matt Rowell. They don't have a first-round pick next year, but they didn't have one this year and they landed down Houston. So I also think Essendon with 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks heading into next year will be in the Rowell race if it extends into next year where he has remained unsigned.
He's 2 years away from free agency as well, so
Yep.
you have to trade for him. What about Luke Davies-Uniacke? He's going to be one of the biggest free agents on the market next year.
No movement on a deal for him yet, and St Kilda has been chasing him harder among many others. He enters next year as the hottest free agent, in my view, in the game. Someone who will get offers of 8 years, worth close to $1.3, $1.4 million. It's not quite at $2 million a year, but he won't be too far off. He has a strong link to the Bombers as well, where Brad Scott's obviously his former coach, but there's still a level of confidence that he re-signs at the Roos. In terms of Essendon looking at free agents, it also has its own in Sam Draper to re-sign, who the Crows are in for. He's very settled in Melbourne at the Bombers as well, but he won't get into contract talks until early in the season. I think he might even get some games under his belt. I think he has something to prove in terms of his value after a couple of injury-hit seasons. Other free agents for this year coming into 2025, Andrew Brayshaw is in talks at the moment. I do not see him going anywhere as well. I see him being a long-term player at the Freo Dockers. Oscar Allen's an interesting one given his body, but we'll be hoping to get a long-term deal there. Marcus Bontempelli, how many years does he sign on for? That's probably the most interesting point there, given his last deal was a 4-year deal. Brandon Starcevic. Braden Maynard is also one I'm keeping an eye on because the Pies brought in 2 players his age to play his position and paid them around $900,000 each season. He's not on that.
Yeah.
Will another club offer him that?
Okay. One to watch there. We mentioned Brandon Starcevic, but what else do you think Brisbane will be looking at next year?
This is one of the major storylines heading into 2025, isn't it? The timing of Joe Danaher's departure, plus matching multiple bids for Levi Ashcroft and Sam Marshall, meant it was near on impossible to drag a key forward out this trade and free agency period. No disrespect to Sam Day, who was obviously a delisted free agent / rookie signing, but they will have time next year, and giving the Lions time to go and attract a player is one of the most dangerous things for the rest of the competition in footy. So there's not heaps of out-of-contract forwards looming in 2025, so just keep an eye on the contract players there and seeing who they can get, because Brisbane is a very attractive proposition and they've landed some big guns over the years.
Who are you keeping your eye on there?
Well, I'm not saying this is... I'm just going to say this. If Sam Darcy goes bananas next year... No, if he goes bananas... Will the Lions come knocking for Jamara?
Yeah. Okay. That is very interesting. All right.
Because Sam Darcy, the ascent of Sam Darcy is coming. He's going to re-sign soon. If it's 2 years, if it's 4 years, he's a locked-in dog. Now, Jamara Ugle-Hagen's contracted for an extra year, of course, beyond next year, but you wonder if they'll knock.
One to watch. Well, Jamara's one number 1 pick. Another one is Harley Reid. He came into the year with just as much fanfare as Jamara.
Yeah.
West Coast is going to be trying all year, again, to get him re-signed.
The need for Reid. There is going to be a fever pitch focus on Harley Reid's contract next year. He has 2 years to run his deal, but if he hasn't added any more years beyond that by the end of next home and away season, then look out. Without saying it, that will tell a story on his future one way or the other. Expect him to have a really good relationship with Andrew McQualter as well as the coach, so it'll be over them to convince him to stay around longer than his initial 3-year deal, but he's already got clubs willing to put on $20 million at 10 years. So he's in no rush, and the need for Reid's signature is coming thick and fast for the Eagles.
Finn Callaghan is going to be a big one at the Giants. Not a free agent, of course. He's one of those players that are coming to the uncontracted but not a free agent. Yeah,
GWS can to lock him in as soon as it can, clearly. He hasn't wanted to think about his contract until getting through this season, his 2024 season, but he's got the ability to name his price if he wanted to explore his options, really. With Sam Darcy getting close to re-signing, as we just spoke to, then Callaghan is probably the best out-of-contract player from that 2021 draft pool. Heading into next year, Kai Loman's another one, as is Nazai Wanganeen-Millera, but in for Finn. That could be about 10 clubs in Victoria, I think.
Yeah, I reckon they will be. Potentially the same ones as the ones in for LDU, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. The difference, of course, being that you're going to have to trade for Finn Callaghan. And what's this guy worth as a top 3 pick only a few years ago?
What about Port Adelaide's big moves?
Well, they've got Miles Bergman, who's out of contract. We've spoken about him a lot on the show in recent weeks as well. So the power moves are interesting to keep an eye on, because there's Miles Bergman, then there's Kane Farrell, who we had Dave Trotter on, his manager, last week on the Countdown show, said, look, we'll get something started soon enough. He's just coming back from hamstring surgery, but he has a weapon, so clearly clubs will see if they can entice him out. And then there's the Zach Butters situation as well, who signed on for an extra 2 years. He's just about to actually start his next contract. He did it a while ago. So he has 2 years to go till free agency. Port Adelaide will be very, 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 very times 50 keen to lock him in this year before he hits free agency. So that'll be a big watch to see if he does that, if he does commit beyond that, because we know Connor Rosie, his best mate at the footy club, signed that big 8-year deal about this time last year. Zach did too at that point. So that's a big one to lead into 2025 and beyond, because given he's a free agent in 2026.
And the devil in the detail, Cal. You mentioned Richmond's massive draft haul before and the 6 first-round picks they took, and the link to Tasmania there, and the reason why clubs want to get in ahead of Tasmania's entry into the competition.
Well, the AFL next year, and this will be one of the storylines for 2025, the AFL next year will announce the list build rules for Tasmania, so it will include the amount of picks they have over multiple drafts, which selections they'll need to trade, sign-on bonuses, for players, access to Tasmanian prospects, their academy setup, how that aligns with the North Melbourne NGA access in that transition period, and likely some special father-son access as well. So then the whips will get cracking. So I think by the end of next year, by the end of 2025, Tasmania will have a recruiting manager, a list manager, a footy boss, maybe a coach even pretty well close to locked in. And I think by the end of next year, they'll have a player or two on the hook to be their big name recruits, because these things don't just start 5-6 months out. You have to plant the seed a little bit, get it in a good player's mind, or a good couple of players' minds that they want to be the marquee guys. So the devil is in the detail. Speaking of, you've become
we're fully fledged, Cal.
Fully fledged.
There we go.
Looks good.
Thanks to our friends down there in Tasmania.
Yeah, you got that one there. So they are the Big Ten storylines that we're tracking ahead of 2025 in the contract space. So keep an eye on all of them.
It's been a massive year on Gettable, and there's still more to come. Stick around just a little bit. All right, as we mentioned, this is our final show of 2024. It's been a season featuring 35 episodes of Gettable, 13 trade radio episodes, 12 trade desks, 3 countdown shows, 2 live draft shows, 1 grand final extravaganza at the MCG. We've given up about 500 t-shirts, a few mugs, some stickers, a lot of Google Pixels as well. We can't get through what we do on this show without a lot of help, Cal.
Yep.
There's plenty of people we've got to thank.
Yeah, to Google and to Google Pixel before we... Oh, look at that. How good's that? There's our wall of fame. We'll get to that in a second. But to Google and to Google Pixel, we have loved your support of the show this year. We've got our Pixels. A few of the best players in the draft have their Pixels, including the #1 pick as well. So get yours too. So a big shout out to Pat, Maggie and Nick at Google. To our guests, as Riley mentioned, the club recruiters and list managers and draftees, player agents, AFL Vickers who came on the show this year. A huge thank you to you and your support of the show. We see you around the board here. Our show is loved because of your input and also your access and insight. So a big appreciation to you guys as well. Behind the scenes, producer Paul Baston, who puts it all together every single week. A huge thanks to Paul for your efforts in making us as steady as we can be and putting up with some crazy ideas along the way. The same goes for Lockie Rand as well, our director. So I appreciate your help as well. Thanks heaps, mate. And again, thanks for this wall of fame that's looking brilliant. Our editor David Smith, who again puts in tireless hours in the lead up and also every single Wednesday, and our full crew and studio team as well, who make us look good as much as we can. So thanks to you guys on the floor and also in the back room. Tyson Densley, Ed Bowman, Mike Rogers, Martin Smith for your support of the show behind the scenes as well. And to everyone who watches, Riley, and everyone
favourites
who listens, engages, sends us questions, likes something or anything we do, our biggest thanks to you, because you spend some of your Wednesdays and some of your Thursdays potentially with us, and we never take that for granted. So we hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope we've passed the audition.
Big thanks to you as well, Cal, for your help throughout the season.
Likewise, Ross.
You can stay in tune for everything.
What's your favourite photo?
Either the Viking one, early doors, or the Oasis one.
I like the Sam Lawler, Sullivan one, just behind there, when they were playing Mario Kart, which might have been the best/worst 2 minutes of our countdown shows.
All right, thank you heaps for watching across the course of season 2024. We'll be back bigger and better than ever next year as well. If you want to stay in touch with us over the summer, follow us on Instagram at Gettable. We'll be answering all of your questions over the summer months as well. We'll see you in 2025.
For all things W, we've got you covered. A cast of the game's biggest stars and experts discuss the top stories and headlines, plus in-depth analysis across the AFLW season. Join us each week for The W Show thanks to NAB on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app.